Welcome to the St. Thomas More Lynchburg's Homily Podcast. We join Father John Christian as he brings his insight and application to the readings for the 16th Sunday in Ordinary Time.
When we reflect on the figures of Martha and Mary, we see the two kind of traditional stand-ins for the twofold aspect of the Christian life. We see contemplation, and so too do we also see action. And sometimes these things seem to be held in tension with one another, and other times they're held to be in contrast. But ultimately, they aren't, because though contemplation could be said to be higher, the two are both necessary. For contemplation lies in recognizing and practicing the presence of God. So contemplation, first and foremost, has to do with divine things, and it addresses our intellect, whereas action is directed to external things, to human things. But you can begin to see how the two have to be complementary. One can't necessarily be at the expense of the other, but rather contemplation, though, can be said to be higher because it will give rise to action. Because again, if one spends time practicing the presence of God, contemplating, meditating, reflecting on God, well, then that means one has spent time contemplating, reflecting, and meditating on love. For as we know, God is love, and love is charity, and charity is the action of God in our soul, and therefore that's what spurs us to true Christian action. For action that does not practice the presence of God, action that does not recognize union with God, action for action's sake, even though the cause might be one that seems to be good, will inevitably become lifeless and ineffectual. But so too can it be said of the apparent life of only prayer. If it lacks an apostolate with works, then it too likewise becomes lifeless and ineffectual. And so there must be both. But it does indeed, could be said, to start with contemplation. For we hear our Lord's words to Martha and Mary, and it certainly seems like Mary abandoned her sister to all the work. Well, she actually did. Here's Martha having to do everything. But our Lord says Mary has chosen the better part. Because as he says to Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things, these external things, these human things. And yet Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her. That contemplation, the divine, endures for all eternity. The cares of the present day and age do indeed come and go, but the reality of God persists for always and forever. And so that's why our Lord indeed says to Mary, you have chosen the better part. But again, that's where the distinction comes in. For as St. Augustine observed when reflecting on this gospel and looking at the figures of Martha and Mary in the contemplative life versus the active life, he looks at it and sees again that there is an inherent complementarity. For in the beginning was the Word, and Mary is listening to the Word. And the Word was made flesh, and Martha was serving the Word. And so again, we can see how the two do indeed go together. St. Thomas Aquinas, the great synthesizer of all of our Christian belief, of our doctrine and dogma, puts forward that the highest life, and this kind of debate that used to occur between action and contemplation, the highest life is the one that actually combines both. Because that time spent in contemplation, that time spent in prayer, is time spent in union with God. For to pray is to lift up our hearts and minds to God in need and in praise. And if that is occurring regularly, then if that relationship with God is right, then the action that we are called to in this Christian life can be properly ordered. There's that age-old admonition to the monk, right? The monk sitting in his cell or in his hermitage, praying his office during the liturgy of the hours, and here's a knock upon the door. Well, if he's deep in that contemplation and decides to not get up and answer the door for that beggar, he's not contemplating God, he's contemplating himself. And so the admonition was always to, cease your prayer and go to that beggar at the door, for that is indeed Christ. And so then for us as modern day Christians, we can see again the complementarity that exists between contemplation and action. The action must come forth from that contemplation, from that union and desire to know, love, and serve God, and then thereby give that right order to the action. And the action must be grounded in that contemplation. The two indeed go together, just as St. Benedict, when he established his community in Norcia, gave us that motto, if you will, for the Benedictine order, ora et labora, prayer and work. The two go together. We are called to unite ourselves to the Lord our God through prayer, through contemplation, through the sacraments, and so too then are we called to witness that in a real and concrete way in the duty that we have towards our brothers and sisters. So there is that exception to the time when contemplation gives way to action. There's a kind of a clever bit in the Summa when Thomas Aquinas is talking about this very issue between contemplation and action. And of course, as he often does, he quotes Aristotle, who put forward that it's better to be wise than to be rich. But if you are in need, it's then better to be rich. And so there comes that moment when the dynamic does indeed enter into and change the situation, when the monk must close his prayer book and open that door and admit that beggar and thereby welcome the Christ. Action and prayer are the two sides of the one coin that is the well-lived and properly ordered Christian life.
Thank you for tuning in to the St. Thomas More Lynchburg's Homily Podcast. For the daily reading and to learn more about the community of St. Thomas More, please visit our website at www.stmva.org. If you were blessed by our podcast today, please give it a like, a kind review, and share it with a friend. God bless.